Tonight, you'll probably run your fingers through your own hair without thinking about it once. Wash it, brush it, forget it. Simple. But for almost 100 years, some of the most powerful people in Europe shaved their heads bald and put someone else's hair on top instead. Not occasionally. Every single day. Judges still do it. So why did an entire continent decide that wearing dead hair was not just normal, but elegant? And here's the part that should stop you. The real reason might have been hiding something a lot darker than fashion. Let's start with the basics. In 1624, King Louis XIII of France started losing his hair early, probably from illness, possibly from something worse. He was young, he was self-conscious, so he did what kings do. He covered it up with a wig. That's it. That's the spark. But here's the thing. One insecure king doesn't create a continent-wide obsession. His son did that. Louis XIV took the throne and turned the wig into a weapon of image control. By the 1670s, he reportedly employed roughly 40 wig makers just for the royal court. Not one wig, a wardrobe of them. Picture a man changing his entire head the way you change a jacket. That's not vanity. That's branding. So what did it actually cost to look like that? A lot. Samuel Pepys, the English diarist, wrote in the 1660s about buying and maintaining wigs, the expense, the upkeep, even his anxiety about wearing one during a plague outbreak, worried the hair had come from the dead. Real diary, real paranoia. A wig wasn't just style. It was a small, expensive act of trust in a stranger's hygiene. But here's the twist. It wasn't only about looking rich. It was about looking clean. Lice were everywhere in the 1700s. Washing hair regularly wasn't common practice. So the elite started shaving their heads completely bald and putting on a wig instead. A wig that could be boiled, deloused, and powdered, while your actual scalp stayed short and manageable underneath. Convenience dressed up as luxury. And that powder wasn't just cosmetic either. Wig powder was often made from a base of finely ground flour, sometimes cut with plaster, and occasionally, depending on the era and recipe, laced with lead, just to get that pale, ghostly white shade the aristocracy wanted. Think about that. People were dusting a known toxin onto their heads every day for decades for a look. So how big did this actually get? Big enough that England taxed it. In 1795, the government introduced a guinea tax on hair powder, basically a luxury tax on looking fashionable. Big enough that wig makers formed their own powerful guilds. Big enough that even now, over 2 centuries later, barristers in the UK still wear a version of that wig into a courtroom. A dead trend that refuses to fully die. But here's the part that turns this from interesting history into, wait, is this actually true? There was a real surgeon working in London during this exact era named John Hunter, widely regarded as the father of modern scientific surgery, a man whose anatomical work still shapes medical training today. Hunter spent years treating and documenting venereal disease among London's wealthy wig-wearing classes at a time when syphilis was quietly devastating the aristocracy. Advanced syphilis causes hair loss, real, documented clinical hair loss, and Hunter's own case notes, real notes from a real physician whose credibility is beyond question, described exactly that pattern over and over, in exactly the social class that was shaving their heads and hiding underneath powdered wigs. Which raises the question nobody really wants to sit with. What if the powdered wig wasn't just fashion? What if, for a meaningful number of the elite, it was a socially acceptable way to hide the physical evidence of a disease nobody could admit to having accepted? Except here's where it gets complicated. Most historians will tell you, correctly, that this theory overreaches. Hair loss in the 1700s had a dozen boring causes that had nothing to do with venereal disease at all. Malnutrition, illness, Simple male pattern baldness, the same thing that affects men today, just with worse hygiene and no Rogaine. Shaving the head for lice control was already common practice among soldiers, sailors, and monks long before wigs became fashionable, purely for cleanliness. And the wig itself, historians note, was overwhelmingly a status symbol first. An expensive, high-maintenance object that only the wealthy could afford to keep clean, which is exactly why it became a marker of class. You didn't need a hidden disease to want one. You just needed money, and a king who'd made baldness look like power instead of weakness. That's the mundane answer, and it's very likely the true one. No secret epidemic, no mass cover-up, just a self-conscious king, a lice problem, and a fashion trend that snowballed for over a century. But here's the thing that answer doesn't fully explain. If wigs were just fashion, expensive, sure, but just fashion, why did the entire practice collapse almost overnight? Fashions in the 1700s usually shifted slowly, over decades, the way trends do. But wig wearing among the elite in England and France nearly vanished within a few short years around the French Revolution and that 1795 powder tax. Not a gradual fade, a near total abandonment, fast enough that it looks less like changing taste and more like people running from something. A tax alone doesn't usually kill a century-old status symbol that fast. Neither does one political upheaval on its own. So what actually broke all at once in such a short window? Nobody has a fully satisfying answer for that part. It's probably the tax, layered on top of a revolution that made anything associated with aristocracy suddenly dangerous to be seen wearing. But the sheer speed of it still doesn't sit quite right. Maybe it really was just money and politics moving fast together. Or maybe, for at least a few of those powdered heads, taking the wig off wasn't just about fashion ending. Maybe it was about finally being allowed to stop hiding whatever was or wasn't underneath. Tonight, when you run your fingers through your own hair without thinking twice, just remember, somewhere in the 1700s, that would have been considered either wildly improper or a small, quiet relief. And hey, if you liked this one, you'll probably enjoy our last video, why moving houses in 1800 was actually dangerous, which proves that literally nothing about being alive 200 years ago was simple, including your furniture. Drop the next mystery you want cracked open in the comments, preferably something that won't require me to research 18th century lead poisoning again. My scalp still hasn't forgiven me.